only to be combated by the most masterful speech maybe ever.
The mic drop that follows.
Welcome back to No Script, an unscripted conversation about theater's best scripts. I'm Jacob, and I would normally say I'm here with Jackson, but today I'm not here with Jackson. Today we are very excited to welcome to the podcast a special guest. We try to have a special guest at least once a season to chat about a script with us from their own particular lens. Usually we invite somebody that has a particular expertise or insight or view of a script, and today that is definitely the case. Today, I am really excited to welcome Grace Yurchuk to the podcast. Grace, welcome.
Yay! Thank you so much. I'm really excited.
We're so excited to have you. I think this will be a great conversation. Today, we're talking about Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, as well as kind of a shared conversation about a different project. Because the reason why Grace is on the podcast, the reason why we're so excited is that Grace has become kind of the internet's leading person about Julius Caesar. I think that now if you are online and you are interested in material about Julius Caesar the play, you are likely to be funneled very quickly to Grace's amazing content.
Which really I could not have guessed even a year ago. So I'm very happy to be here.
Well, that's great. I know I've been following your material for quite some time, from back when you were posting the very early versions of some of your work. One of the things that I really love is adaptation and adaptation work, and I teach Shakespeare and playwriting, and so I was fascinated from the material from the beginning, and clearly my algorithm knew that I would like your material, and so I've connected to it and seen the project grow, and it's really just a delight. Do you want to tell us, we'll have more time, I think, later in the episode to talk more in depth about how you're working with the text and what you're doing with it. But do you want to give, for the folks that don't know, just a little insight into the work that you're doing with Julius Caesar?
Yeah, absolutely. This is my favorite thing to talk about, so I will definitely hop right in. I'm writing a all-female musical adaptation of Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. It's full-length musical. I'm condensing the first 3 acts of Julius Caesar into a musical format. It's entirely sung through, and my job is sort of trying to stay true to the text in the first place, but also sort of modernize it and put a new spin on it to make the classics more available to modern audiences. Finding ways to say, hey, this story's still very relevant and exciting. And, I think adding music makes that, it turns it into something that's more mine, on top of the fact that, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's Shakespeare. So it's been a really fun journey. This is my first attempt at writing for a musical theater, period. So I'm glad that it's been received so kindly. And I've just been having a blast making this thing and getting feedback as I write it. Every time I make a new draft or a new demo, that's going on the internet the next day. So I've been getting a lot of feedback and commentary and building my audience in real time. And I just got funding to make the first recordings of the thing that aren't just my voice, and there are other wonderful, amazing voices. I'm really excited to put that together. I'm in the phase of just thinking about those next steps. So that's what I've been cooking up. So I'm, again, super excited to be here and talk about it with you.
Well, yeah, it's just fabulous, and it's great evidence, and I hope you feel supported that your Kickstarter campaign for the studio recording of your work was funded fairly quickly, is my sense of following it all and seeing it on social media. And your social media following is certainly evidence of not only that people love your music, but the excitement around what you're doing with this project, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, thank you. No, it was totally... I couldn't even keep up. I didn't have any of the graphics prepared for the first day of the campaign. I was just crossing my fingers, and then it was it was so fast. And so you have to picture I'm just sitting here and I'm quickly being oh, and now we're at 2,000, and now we're at 5,000. I couldn't even keep up, and I'm so grateful that that's how it went. I'm still in shock about the whole thing.
That's just tremendous. Well, let me, for our audience that
Mhm.
don't know, give the formal introduction to Grace. Grace Yurchuk is a musical theater and pop singer-songwriter whose journey from NYU's dorm rooms to the music scene is nothing short of inspiring. With a music degree and a focus in classical voice, Grace has unique insight when it comes to the world of storytelling through song. During her time at NYU, she released her debut album, Surprise, Surprise, and a range of singles, all of which she produced independently. In December of 2023, Grace's career took a notable turn as she began sharing original songs daily on social media, quickly amassing a following of over 200,000 across various platforms. Her online presence has become a testament to her dedication and constant creativity, blending her performance experiences with an honest, quirky, and endearing songwriting style. Her sound has drawn comparisons to artists and composers she deeply admires, including Taylor Swift, Jonathan Larson, Lin-Manuel Miranda, and Stephen Sondheim. Currently, Grace is developing her first full-length musical theater work, an adaptation of Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, very relevant to today. The audience for this ambitious project is rapidly growing on all platforms as Grace shares snippets of her creative process. Whether crafting a new song, developing a musical project, or teaching aspiring writers, Grace is dedicated to improving authenticity and helping others find their unique musical voice. She is honored to have this opportunity and is determined to make a positive impact with her work. That's the formal bio. It's always awkward. I say to all the guests when they're on, like, sitting and listening to your own bio read back to you is
I'm
just
like,
one
oh
of the
no.
worst experiences. It should feel good, but it never does.
I know. I was like, I've never done anything. Why would you say that?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Well,
That's
maybe
so funny.
before we set up the formal side of our conversation, to whatever degree we mean formal in this format, do you want to tell us, like,
Mhm.
maybe give us the briefest glimpse at what was so attractive to you about this play? I mean, this is, as with, about half of Shakespeare's plays, they are the most famous plays in the world. People who are not theater people recognize at least the very beginning of Friends, Romans, Countrymen, and probably have
Oh,
a
of
sense where
course.
it's from. So it's one of the most famous works out there. But there are other very famous plays that you could have adapted and certainly would have, been recognizable to people online. So what was so exciting about it to you?
I love talking about when I decided Caesar because truly it was kind of just like something that came completely out of the blue. But I will say, I think Brutus as a person fascinated me the most, just even separate from the play and from the world of the musical. I on gosh, and someone can check my work on this. I think it was March 1st, and that's when I was doing about a song a day. Um, and I decided to just write a song from Brutus's perspective. And truthfully, I felt like I personally was in a bit of a rut. I hadn't written a lot of full length songs in a second because I was so focused on doing the smaller songs that are more, consumable on social media. Uh, and there was something about Brutus to me and that song that day that I was like, I just was very attached to this character, and it was the first like full song I'd written in a while. I didn't even post the full thing. There's more verses to that if anyone wants to go find it. Um, and so it turned into like I started obsessing over this character, and I knew from I had just come off of like putting my first album out. I know that I love to write, and I figured a musical could maybe be something that I tried to do someday.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a lot of people who have been following me being like, "Where's the full work? Like, are you working on a larger theater thing?" And so it was about a month and a half later where I was like, I can't stop thinking about this Brutus thing. Let me go like look at this play. I'm a big Sondheim fan, and I know that his advice from Oscar Hammerstein was, "Hey, your first musical should be based on a really good play." So I was taking that advice through the grapevine. I was like, what's better than Shakespeare? And I can't ditch this character idea. And so Brutus's song, the first draft that I posted, kind of kickstarted the rest of my interest. I kind of grew more and more obsessed with it as I worked, and the more I dove into it, it felt very natural to me. And I remember my friends in school just being like, I was like, "Hey guys, do you think I should do a Caesar musical? I don't know, I'm just like interested in it." And then they kept coming to me being like, "Hey, I can't stop thinking about that." And I'm like, "Good, me neither." I'm like, I guess I'm gonna write it. And obviously, as I've continued working on it, I'm so fascinated by, I think, its current relevancy. I think there's so much that I can find in so many of these characters. And it truly is like I love it more as I work on it. And it's funny that it kind of just spurred from a small moment of fascination that grew into not okay obsession.
Well, I think that I'm sure, in fact, that I heard that original Brutus song, and that's how I was
Mm.
connected to your channels. And I could be wrong about this, but it's not part of the project anymore. Is that true? That song?
Brutus is staying. That one,
Okay.
something about that one. I had to ditch a Caesar song and then I
Oh,
released the
okay.
demo because I felt bad. I was like,
Uh-huh.
I'm sorry, guys.
I
I
see.
still
I
like this song,
remember
it just doesn't
that
fit anymore.
post, which is probably like a weird thing to catch you on the back end. But I remember the post where you were
Oh,
like,
no,
"I'm
no.
not going to include this song anymore," so I had the songs confused. But
Mhm.
I mean, that's got to be
Oh.
a good place to feel like you have too much material.
Oh, for sure. Well, again, there's so much to work with in the play and a lot of things that I'm trying to keep intact. Brutus's song, for some reason, was again a lot of like magical spur of the moment things happening. This is another thing where if anyone wants to go check my work, the caption for that video, I kind of knew I was onto something. And so the caption is like, this is the first draft of the first song for my first show, which translates to like, please, I have nothing else. This is the only thing that exists for it so far. But there was something about that one. I think because I'm so fascinated by Bruce's character, I feel like I understood him really, really early on.
Hmm.
And I haven't touched that one. That one, I'm going to end up recording that for the EP. And really, I'm trying to keep that, it feels like the heart of the show to me kind of started with that
Yeah.
one. So I'm
Hmm.
glad that that has been such a nice through line, even as I've had to like scrap and rewrite other things.
Great.
Shout out
Well,
Brutus's song.
I'm excited to hear more about your fascination with Brutus's character. Before we get too much farther into the conversation, I want to invite everybody listening to check out our Patreon page, patreon.com/no script podcast, all one word, no hyphens, no underscores. That's where you can become a supporter of the show. Our great supporters over there are the folks that fund this podcast, that make doing this podcast possible, having great guests like Grace, and continuing into our, umpteenth season at this point. Thank you, thank you, thank you if you're a supporter. If you're not yet, we encourage you to just check it out. We have different monthly tiers. Everybody knows how Patreon works, I think. Our lowest tier has been, will continue to be $1 a month. For $1 a month, you are part of what makes this podcast possible. Please check us out over there, patreon.com/no script podcast. We'll see you over there. And now back to the script. Before we dive too much farther in, Grace, and we tell everybody how to connect with us a little bit, how could folks who are interested at this point connect more with you before we really turn our attention to ancient Roman figures?
Oh yes, let's stay modern with the social
Yeah,
media for
we'll
a
do
second.
social media and then we'll do ancient Rome.
Yeah, totally connected. And this podcast totally is.
Yeah.
You can check out, I've been posting all of the updates as I'm writing them on my Instagram, which is just my name, my TikTok, which should be my name, but isn't yet. It's still, when I made my TikTok in high school, it was secret. I didn't want anyone to know it was there. So it's still It's the Grace Place is my username.
Oh, wow. Okay.
If you want to go see those updates, I post a lot of silly content on there. But luckily, in the future, you can also check out the Kickstarter page. It's still open to view like all of my thoughts on what I want for this show, where it's going, and stay tuned for the absolutely amazing recordings that are coming with this all-star cast that I'm putting together. So yeah, you'll want to stay posted. You should check out my pages. The end.
Give them a follow, because then you'll just get like little treats occasionally as you're scrolling the endless doom cycle of social media. You'll get really wonderful content that inspires you and is full of creativity and life. Please do check that out. Let me just give, for the folks that are coming to the podcast without a huge knowledge of Julius Caesar, just a little bit of a sense of what we're talking about. We do a context and a synopsis. Neither of these are very full or very long, especially with the Shakespeares. We tend to give less information rather than more, because as opposed to a lot of the contemporary plays we do, which are hard to find information about, if you want to know more about Julius Caesar the play than I'm about to give you, you can Google it and you will have a truly infinite amount of information at your fingertips. So let me just give you just the briefest look into what we got going on. Julius Caesar, it's really called The Tragedy of Julius Caesar, of course, written by Shakespeare. We believe this was performed around 1599, although that's kind of first performed, although that's kind of skeptical because we have a collection of Shakespeare's plays published in 98, and this was not part of them. So that's where we're like, okay, it probably had to come after 98. And we also have this like very early theater review from somebody who talked about seeing a play inspired by Julius Caesar in 99. And so we're kind of assuming that was William Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. We don't actually know that for a fact, but we don't have any other texts from the time period that were like, it could have been this other play. So we as a sort of scholarly community, our very loosely held consensus is that this was first performed in 1599. So we are talking about a play, of course, that is hundreds and hundreds of years old. It was one of the first plays performed at the Globe Theater, which, so beyond being one of the more famous plays, it sort of was part of the early life of one of the more famous theaters. It was then revived by Thomas Killigrew's King's Company in 1672. And then as we do, I'm really skipping ahead at this point to just some major notable stuff. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of productions of Julius Caesar across time. In 1864 at the Winter Garden Theater, notable because John Wilkes Booth played Mark Antony. John Wilkes Booth, of course, the famous assassin of President Lincoln, in a play about assassination, played the friend of the leader who was assassinated and then would go on to assassinate a political leader in America. The layers of real life and story that are wound up in that production are crazy. 1916, apparently there was a production in Beechwood Canyon in California, which, according to the stories, more than 40,000 people came to see at this big outdoor venue in California. The Old Globe produced in 1935. In 1937, one of the more famous productions of the play in history, directed by Orson Welles, was at the Mercury Theater and transferred over to Broadway at what's now known as the Netherland Theater. That's going to be kind of one of the major capstone productions of Julius Caesar in history, as many of Orson Welles' Shakespeare productions are. There's a 1953 film directed by Joseph L. Mankiewicz. There is Royal Shakespeare Company, of course, has done the play dozens of times. 57 was one of their first moments doing it. Utah Shakespeare Festival in 1966. There was a BBC three-part television play written by John Griffith Bowen called Hail Caesar in 1973. Both that and the earlier movie are available in full on YouTube. I watched some scenes because it's interesting to see the change in acting styles. There's so many great clips of contemporary actors doing the material. So it's fun to see the same material produced by actors who were trained and working almost 100 years ago. Just a very interesting change in how acting works. 1976 at Utah Shakespeare Festival, there's a television adaptation directed by Herbert Wise in 78. Shakespeare Company, Royal Shakespeare Company in 79. 84, Riverside Shakespeare Company of New York City. They produced one of the first modern dress Julius Caesars, which has come to be kind of the way to do Julius Caesar in most settings, setting it as part of a contemporary political landscape. There's some danger to that, as I'll talk about here in just a minute, but that's one of the earliest moments of that we have. 86 at Utah Shakespeare Festival, 91 at Oregon Shakespeare Festival, 95 at Royal Shakespeare Festival, part of the 98-99 season at Shakespeare's Globe. Denzel Washington played Brutus on Broadway in 2005. The production apparently was panned, but it made a bunch of money because Denzel Washington was so good as Brutus. So that's cool. Love Denzel Washington on this podcast. 2009 at Marin Shakespeare Company in California. You know, the various Chesapeake Shakespeare Company does it a bunch. Oregon Shakespeare Festival does it a bunch. In 2012, the Royal Shakespeare Company produced a version with an all-black cast they adapted it to BBC television film, that there are some truly incredible clips of online. I encourage you to check it out. It is very powerfully performed. performed. Also in 2012, and this maybe is particularly interesting to your project, Grace, Phillida Lloyd directed an all-female production of Julius Caesar at the Donmer Warehouse, which then transfers to St. Anne's Warehouse in Brooklyn. Also some great clips of that one. 2012, there's an Italian film called Caesar Must Die about inmates who are rehearsing to do a production of Julius Caesar, and then like some of the stuff from the play, of course, like happens within the prison, very meta. Guthrie Theater, an acting company, did a 2012 production where there was a black actor who was playing Caesar and was supposed to represent President Obama on his magnificent rise. Very little controversy on that. But then, of course, in 2017, somebody does the inverse of that, where they produce New York Shakespeare in the Park, produced by Public Theater, rather, depicts Caesar as President Trump, and it kind of blows up with controversy. That I don't think is very hard to imagine. But you can see the danger of taking Julius Caesar and setting it in too contemporary and familiar of a political landscape, because it really becomes about something else. And listen, the Caesar's assassinated in the middle of the play. So if you start to make contemporary figures the people who are being assassinated, there starts to be some uncomfortable cultural questions asked about that. Many more productions besides, most recently 2025, about 2 months before we're recording this podcast, Oregon Shakespeare Festival produced it with an all-female cast. I will put a link to that in our show notes to their page about it, just because it's so cool looking. I love their design production and how they achieved it. It's, of course, as all Shakespeare's are, it is quoted and referenced throughout literature. There's too many. I just want to bring your attention to two before we really dive into the story. Ray Bradbury's book, Fahrenheit 451. Many people read that in high school. Great, fantastic novel. Very uncomfortable to read nowadays, but it is out there for you. One of the characters has their last words in the book are a direct quote. "There is no terror, Cassius, in your threats, for I am armed so strong in honesty that they pass me as an idle wind, which I respect not." One of the great kind of middle finger lines in all of Shakespeare. And then, of course, John Green's novel, The Fault in Our Stars. You may think, oh, what a wonderful poetic phrase. Well, if you hear a wonderful poetic phrase, maybe it's original, likely it's just taken right from Shakespeare. That is the case.
Right.
That is the case of The Fault in Our Stars, just right from Julius Caesar, which is tremendous. Grace, any thoughts and reflections from that kind of whirlwind tour through a little bit of the life of Julius Caesar? Your production, your adaptation would be part of that if we were not discussing it, because it is part of a lineage of people producing this play, working on this play, the story, the poetry, the characters. You're part of a several 100-year movement of the Julius Caesar crowd.
Wow. Well, I mean, first, I wish I could have just sat down and talked with you when I was doing all my research when I started writing this. I would have loved that speed run of all of it. But that's so true. I think that's part of the reason why I'm so fascinated and enthralled by this story, with the number of times I've now consumed it in the different ways. I saw an all-female production of it at NYU. They invited me so graciously. So it's the more things I discover about it, there's such a timelessness to it. And it's funny you touched on how so many contemporary adaptations will, use current political figures and like this sort of controversy that arises out of that. That's literally in part why I'm making mine set in ancient Rome. I want to stay as true to this original text as possible and show, even in this lineage, the core of this has so many lessons that we can learn from and consider, how we perceive and interpret politics in any time. Whoever's in, whoever has power, how we perceive that can, this play sort of influenced how I think about that, especially now. So yeah, it's so cool to see how so many people have brought this to life, and I'm very excited to sort of bring my spin to it while maintaining the part of it that makes us tell the story over and over and over again.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and I think you're right to point out the what your musical maybe could do by going back to the ancient Roman setting. That is very uncommon for Julius Caesar productions nowadays because everybody loves these sort of contemporary views. But it does get tricky to make it too contemporary because of the assassination and what that the killing does to, if the political figures are recognizable, it really changes how you interact with the story, which has so much rich commentary on crowds, on rhetoric, on political speech, and how powerful it is. But the second that somebody you recognize and support, honestly, is assassinated in the show, it totally alters your encounter with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's why, like I said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I tell my students about this all the time.
Yeah.
This is sort of honestly rooted a little bit in the fact that I was trained in performance. That's like my degree. And so much of what I was taught at NYU is, hey, you can't go play an emotion, right? You're not going to go get out on stage. And if the text you're singing, no matter what language it's in, if you think it's sad, you go play it sad. You're not going to make anyone in the audience sad by being that. That's not how this works. The only thing you can do is correctly tell the story. I tell my students all the time, it's like, you have to get from point A to point B. You have to go through some kind of journey in the song. And it could literally depend on like if someone had lunch today or not in the audience, if they had a good sleep last night. You can't control what anyone thinks and how anyone's going to perceive your work. So here I have this wonderful text to base this off of. I literally could not ask for a better first source material. So
it's
I'm not
hard to get better than the Shakespeare
yeah.
plays for source material.
Yeah, seriously. Like I have a problem as an audience member a lot when I'm being told what to feel, even if I agree with it. And so my job here is, hey, I've got this really, really good play that I know is relevant, and this story should be retold. And yes, I'm adding my Grace flair because that's who I am. And this is the way that I can, create this material and make it mine. But also, I want someone to be able to go in and just be able to enjoy the art and reflect for themselves. And maybe it's like you're walking out of the theater and you're having your own little debate with the people you watched it with. That's the goal here. There's so much incredible commentary. Why would I try to dilute it? You know what I mean?
No, yeah, absolutely. And what I didn't tell you before, maybe I could have, should have, would have. This episode is coming out about a couple of weeks after we wrapped up our themed month for this season. So we do these months of conversations where we talk about scripts that have something in common. Usually we try to do a variety. For theme month, we do scripts that share something and we talk across the scripts. So this season we did adaptation month and we looked at 4 different adaptations, plays or musicals that are adapted from other source material. And that question of how to be faithful to the source material while being willing to lean into what your adaptation, how the story is going to be told differently. And that tension is really where adapters do their unique voice comes out. It's how do you handle the whatever being faithful to the source material means in trying to present the story to an audience while being willing to say there is something different that I'm doing that is also powerful, valuable, and it is an addition to the story, not a subtraction or a distraction.
Definitely. I think that's also why I'm enjoying writing all of these rules for women. Everybody on stage, it's there will be girls, and I think that's the most obvious change that I'm making. And one, it's in reference to Shakespeare. If all the roles were men in the first place, if we're going all the way back, I'm just flipping it in a way that's fun. And some of that is just based in very real world, things in the musical bubble. Most roles are written for men, period. We experienced this problem in college. When the administration was picking shows, there were plenty of times where they were like, what are we supposed to do? We're out of shows that have this many roles for women, and there's mostly women in this room. So not a lot of people are going to get cast. there's so many young performers who are training to be in this industry and they should be more than welcome. And then they enter the field and they're like, wait, I can only play two kinds of roles. I can be like, especially if you're in classical music, you can be like a funny lyric soprano or you have a pants role. It becomes very limiting and constricting for women when the industry is actually overwhelmed with talented, wonderful women who deserve roles. So me, I just have my own, like, there's a fire that I have for roles for women. I'm sure beyond Caesar and the next works that I write will absolutely have women at the center. Even sans gender bending, even, when I was training in theater, like in high school, currently right now, if you have a kid in theater, if you're a parent listening to this, you're probably like, oh, great. So they just did Legally Blonde. They're going to do Mean Girls. Maybe if you're lucky,
yes.
they'll do Little Women. Like it's the same three shows in rotation. And I'm here like, hey, the classics are so important. Shakespeare classes are great. And I'm sure Julius Caesar, just in terms of like, you're learning about ethos, pathos, logos in school, you're probably reading the play, bare minimum. If you're in world history, you're going to talk about ancient Rome. If you're into theater, then hey, maybe you're in a drama class. Julius Caesar would be great in that environment. So just me personally making it women is related to like theater education, making more roles that are well developed and not just the stereotypical tropes.
Yes.
But also because of my, the classical training, I just want to write beautiful parts for women and things that I would want to sing, which is also going to be a sad day for me when all of a sudden I'm like, wait a second, I'm not singing all of them anymore.
I know. That's going to be such a big shift. I'm fascinated by
I know.
that.
When I'm in the studio, I'm going to be like, oh my gosh, it's not my voice, thank goodness. Free me. I'm excited to hear other people like just sing the heck out of it. So yeah, I think that's the most obvious change that I'm making. But ultimately, as long as I think I'm still remaining truthful to the story, and at bare minimum, I think that's going to have people asking enough questions when they're leaving the theater. It's like, hey, if we're talking about political relevancy now and just the voices of women, period. If I can highlight any additional perspectives through this, concerning like Portia's in the play significantly, but Calpurnia kind of isn't. And I'm adding a few things for them without drawing away from the fact that like, hey, have you noticed the actual only two women in the play aren't really in it? So, I think having more women on stage will draw a certain, a microscopic lens on some of these things that I'm not going to have to, make incredibly obvious is the wrong word for it. But again, I'm not forcing anyone to think a certain way. I just want them to perceive this work and this story as clearly as I can tell it.
That's fabulous. This is a great additional conversation as part of our larger adaptation conversation. That's so insightful. Speaking of the story, let me just give us the most high level overview of the story. For the Shakespeare fanatics out there, don't come for me. I am not doing a scene by scene, moment by moment synopsis. That would take the whole episode. This is the most high level sense of the story. Again, if you want more info, Wikipedia has a breakdown that's like several scrolls long of the story. Go check that out there. This is just for the folks that just need the most base insight. So the story starts, we are in ancient Rome. The community of Rome, sort of led by Julius Caesar, has just defeated their sort of big rival in Pompeii. And Julius Caesar is returning to Rome after this big military victory. Rome, of course, is something like a democracy. They certainly believe that they are. I'm not sure we would recognize them as such, but they believe in the freedom of all people. But Julius Caesar has returned, and essentially the crowd is going crazy for him. And right away in the story, some people are like, hey, crowd, you used to be going crazy for Pompeii, the people that we just defeated, and now you're going crazy for Julius Caesar, and it's like you hate Pompeii. So like, what's going on there? But the crowd is going crazy, and some people are concerned that because the crowd is so, agitated, activated by Julius Caesar's victory, that they may want to make him king. And by making him king, they would essentially take away the freedom of the whatever sort of pseudo-democracy is going on at the time. The person that seems, or the two people, let's say, that seem most concerned about that right away are Brutus and Cassius. And though the play is called Julius Caesar, this is really a play about Brutus. I assume you agree with that based on our conversation so far, Grace.
For sure.
Yeah. So Cassius comes to Brutus right during this big military parade and says, he gives him a lot of compliments. This play is a lot about the different methods of persuasion. So you were talking about, Grace, in teaching it in high school in terms of ethos, pathos, logos. Persuasion really is the core of this play. And you get that right away. Cassius is persuading Brutus to say, hey, listen, I'm concerned about the fact that Julius Caesar may be trying to gain some power. I think you might be concerned. You're really good friends. You're really good friends with Julius Caesar. You say you love him, but we're concerned about this. And Brutus says, okay, maybe I am concerned about it. At one point, he hears the crowd shouting, and he believes for a frightened moment that they have crowned him king right then. And his sort of emotions are revealed. But he says, well, let me think about it, and I'll get back to you later. We go on. Julius Caesar meets the soothsayer, some sort of prophet in the crowd, who delivers the famous "Beware the Ides of March," of course, meaning the 15th of March. Beware this particular date. You should beware of it. Caesar kind of says, okay, sure, thanks, I appreciate that, and rolls on. Again, not a detailed synopsis, so we're skipping ahead quite a bit. Caesar is offered a crown. We hear this story on the back end that Mark Antony, his good friend, tries to offer him a kingship 3 times, and he denies it 3 times. Later, we meet Brutus in his garden, and he is tortured mentally by what he should do over this situation. He comes to the conclusion that the only way to preserve the freedom of the people of Rome, you can have your own opinions and questions about his real motivations, but that is what he says out loud, that the only way to do that is to kill Caesar. At that moment, Cassius and the rest of the conspirators arrive, and they make their plan. Brutus's wife, Portia, does say, like, hey, what's going on? You seem really upset. And he kind of says, I'll tell you about it later. Let's not talk about it right now. Advancing on, and again, very high level look here. The conspirators essentially trick Julius Caesar by saying, like, hey, we have a request of you, that we want you to bring you to the Senate, even though you don't want to go to the Senate. There's all these storms, there's all these signals that something terrible is going to happen. But Julius Caesar ignores them and ignores the advice of his wife, goes, and on the way is tricked and is assassinated by this group of people. This is the whole group of people that all stab him independently. That's where that image comes from, all the different knife wounds in Caesar. In the last moment, Caesar sees that his good friend Brutus is one of the assassins and delivers the famous "Et tu, Brutus," and you, Brutus, is essentially, you are also one of the assassins, and dies. Mark Antony, then, Julius's great friend, begins his revenge tour. He also tricks the conspirators just as they've tricked him and says, hey, listen, I'm upset about it, but I'm on your side. You should let me speak at your funeral. Brutus, who, to be really honest with you, has made a series of very poor decisions. One of them was that when the conspirators were making their plan, he said, we don't have to kill Mark Antony. He won't have any power once we get rid of Caesar. And then when Mark Antony's like, hey, listen, I'm on your side. Just let me talk at Caesar's funeral. All the conspirators are like, I don't think that we should do that. And Brutus is like, no, it'll be okay. It'll show the people that we respect and, honor the death, even though we had to do it. And so what follows is 2, one of them being the more famous, but really 2 of the great speeches like in literature. Brutus's speech to the crowd, which also, it doesn't quite begin with friends, Romans, countrymen, but it begins with something very similar. He stands up and gives a really powerful speech about the reasons why they did it, and the fact that he loved Caesar dearly, but he loved Rome more, and freedom. They don't really use the word democracy in the play, but that's what you're reading into. Freedom, the ability for people to make their own choices and not be ruled by a king. It's a masterful speech. only to be combated by the most masterful speech maybe ever.
The mic drop that follows.
Teddy Roosevelt gave the great Bull Moose speech. Martin Luther King Jr. gives a great speech. Those three might be like three of the great speeches ever. And this is in that canon. Mark Antony stands up and gives the famous Friends, Romans, Countrymen speech, where he kind of avoids directly criticizing the people who killed Caesar, but very clearly does criticize them and gets the crowd riled up to seek their revenge. What follows after that is essentially the way a lot of the Shakespeare tragedies and political plays end. These sort of scenes from war. Brutus and Cassius muster their own armies. Mark Antony musters an army with Julius Caesar's nephew, also named Caesar, but this one is Octavius Caesar. They muster their army. In the end, Cassius and Brutus die. Brutus does like see Caesar's ghost a number of times throughout the end. And then at the very end of the play, once Mark Antony and his successful military campaign discover Brutus dead, Mark Antony does sort of say, this was the only honorable person among all the conspirators. It's a hotly contested interpretation of those events, I will say, but it is the way that the play concludes. Again, very high level look. I skipped a lot of the battle stuff, but that's a general sense of the story. And it does occur to me, Grace, that this really is kind of a play of two halves. There's the political intrigue, rhetoric, speeches section, and then we move in to the battle section. And I know that you said earlier that your musical adaptation is really that first kind of rhetoric, political intrigue section. So you want to talk a little bit about that and this kind of play of two parts?
Yes, absolutely. Great synopsis. The reason I'm shopping it, the reason I'm getting rid of the second half of this with all of the battles is because when I'm thinking about, play versus musical and that sort of structure and what lands in a musical, this is again very Sondheimian, but so much of how a musical ends determines what an audience thinks of it. It could be the best thing you've ever seen, and if the ending is, it doesn't matter if it's a tragedy or if it's a romantic thing. Truly, the actual ending. It needs to be satisfying to the audience if something goes wrong or right. And if it isn't, then they're going to leave upset and they're not going to think that the whole show was good. And so when I'm looking at this entire arc for it, the speeches are just where do you go after that? Like if really intermission was right there and then you leave that entire momentum behind, I have always felt in any adaptation that I want, it almost feels like two separate plays to me. And so ending
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I would think a lot of people listening don't actually know that the last two acts of Julius Caesar are these interspersed sort of war scenes. And that I would think a lot of people listening who have a loose sense of it think that the speeches kind of are the end of the play.
Right. It feels there's such gravity to them. And it's not to say that the last couple acts aren't wonderful. There's some really, really good material in there. I think it's so hard to watch the end of Cassius and Brutus and the fact that Brutus can't even actually technically kill himself. Like, it's just, there's so many layers to it. And the fact that it ends with Mark Antony sort of having this moment of, I think, perceived gentleness to be like, this was the most honorable man of Rome. Especially the quote always sticks with me that like Brutus, he's too gentle for this is sort of like something they say about him. And that's something that I've identified with him greatly. So it's not to say those acts aren't like great, just in the musical sense of the format, that ending, and specifically what I think is a good strategy for Mark Antony's like full development in the musical form. I really care about his character a lot. And it feels right to leave him in that moment. And I think that lesson is also one that I'm sort of trying, not lesson per se, but I guess the message of like, you're watching the Roman people who started this play in a frenzy about, it's the end of Pompey and now ushering in Caesar as the potential solo, quote unquote, like leader now. There's an interesting mirror image now at the end of this act, which is now Caesar is the one who's dead. And we have Brutus processing out on, to the pulpit. Again, super interesting language there, but I won't totally go off the rails and talk about all the specific language there. But it's such a contrasting image. I didn't want to stray from that. Again, always
Yeah.
point A to point B. What's the most straightforward way that I can tell the story? So I like
Mhm.
ending it right there.
Yeah, well, and the latter half of the play, half, it's really more like a third. These battle scenes
Right.
does continue what to me is like the central thing going on in the play, which is Shakespeare making these really insightful scenes of persuasion and the way that people speak and persuade each other through their speech. There's a lot of plays, Macbeth being one of them, where people persuade each other through violence and through brute
Mm-hmm.
force. And there obviously is violence in this play, but really just the one stab, and then they're fighting battles. But I think what I'm saying is, even in the battles, you get these really
Mm-hmm.
great persuasion scenes. Cassius and Brutus are given all of these things to debate about that are a little like they could have been, at one point they have a fairly lengthy debate about whether to march to Philippi or to stay and wait for them to come there. And it's like, how much are we really following the story of whether they go or stay? Not that much to me. But what's interesting is that Shakespeare gives them really high stakes things to debate about. And so that there is a continuation of the idea of how do we persuade each other to get what we want, even into the battle, even while violence and war are being done around them. And so I guess I'm really curious in your sense, especially as you're adapting and adding music to this, like the power
Mm-hmm.
of rhetoric as a centerpiece of Julius Caesar.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This is, I think, what draws me to it the most. I think I'm also a better lyricist than I am a musician sometimes. I love
Hmm.
words. I love the quadruple meanings you can get out of things. Also, the fact that I have some of the best speeches ever to work with
Yeah.
has been a challenge, but also something that really like motivates me to get this right, you know?
Uh-huh.
Um, and yeah, no, you're absolutely right about the latter half of all of that with, the power of persuasion. The entire thing, the play starts with a debate and people persuading each other.
Yes.
You can see in real time the effects and the power of persuasion, uh, and this sort of idea that you can even go to like the empathy of people and you can persuade people's emotions in a way that there's a good power of persuasion, but also the negative that like you can appeal to someone's like deepest faults. So like for example, Brutus fascinates me for a lot of reasons. And when Cassius first comes in the way that I'm writing his song, where he's like, it's the put a mirror up to yourself. I know you know something's going on song, trying to persuade him, hey, something should be done about your BFF, Caesar over there. And the key to when Cassius finally gets Brutus to sort of really consider this decision and decide that Caesar has to die, is when he plants all of these fake letters, presumably written by these fake Roman people. He knows how he can appeal to Brutus, and they treat each other like they're like brothers. They are so close, and he still would go to the worst place and be like, yeah, we're going to pretend that Rome is begging Brutus to kill Caesar, and we're going to put one of these letters at the base of his father's statue. And the historical context behind that's crazy. Like Brutus's father also died protecting Rome from tyranny. It was very pro-Rome, pro quote unquote democracy. So like literally going for family and lineage and connecting that to this power of persuasion. These characters are not afraid to just go in for the kill, literally, but even just with their words and how they use them. That's so fascinating to me. And it goes not just on the personal level, but by the time we're at the speeches, Mark Antony has seen enough and understands enough that the power of his words can reignite Rome into civil war. That is not, I think, who he is at the beginning of the play at all.
No,
It's been like 24 hours the way that Shakespeare condenses it.
at the very beginning, he's presented as almost, I mean, this is contemporary view, but like almost like a kind of jock, like he's running a race.
Mm-hmm.
He's sweaty. He's there's a
Yeah.
lot of contemporary looking back on this play and others plays in Shakespeare's work for like presentations of people who don't have like traditional straight sexuality, and like the fact that
Mm-hmm.
Mark Antony was likely this very attractive athlete. He's running in this
Mm-hmm.
ceremonial race, and that person becomes this master political manipulator not only of
Mm-hmm.
the crowd in terms of Cassius and Brutus and getting the crowd against them, but also in how he manipulates the situation with Octavius Caesar, with the other folks, with with the war movement and the regaining of power at the end. There's a lot of looking at his speech at the end, what he says about Brutus, as a similar thing to what Brutus said about Caesar, right? It's like, well, listen,
Mm-hmm.
we had to kill him, but I really do respect him. He really was a great guy. We
Right.
had to kill him, but he was a great guy.
Right. It's so true. His arc is so important to me in that way because similarly, um, the idea of like, oh, he's presented as this jock. He canonically likes art and music and games, which is just so not connected to these other powerful figures in the play. And I think part of the reason that you can tell none of them take him seriously and none of them perceive him as a threat, even though he is also quite close to Caesar. Like that should have been perceived as a threat. And so in my sort of, speaking of, since it's adaptation month, the fact that it's all women on stage, the way I've sort of chosen to bring in why people don't take him seriously, I've made him a soprano. Just his voice is a bit higher than everyone else. And throughout the play, like womanish and womanly is an insult. Any feminine
Yes.
traits are insulting amongst these like very, macho guys just trying to prove that they're all, in on something. And so I really am trying to make a point to like, he has a lot of feminine traits, liking art and music and wanting to participate in fun. He is participating in the games and the Roman people like him. From the first moment I bring him on stage, the Romans are singing with him. And there's an emphasis, again, power of rhetoric, that he's speaking about all of them, that we're all going to have fun today. We're all going to participate in these games. And he, from the first time he's on stage, he does have the power of, he kind of already knows that the Roman people like him. Mm-hmm. That's something I'm like planting, even though now on top of the fact that like, yeah, he's a jock. Also, he's got these feminine traits to him that other people wouldn't take seriously. Ultimately, by the time his speech begins, it is in a soprano range. He sings the highest note in all of the score so far. He is at high G for My Heart is in the Coffin with Caesar is like the highest point in the show to sort of emphasize that voice trope thing. But anyway, that's really getting into the nitty-gritty of voice things.
No, that's great because I think you're totally right that there has to be a reason. And I think about it more from the directorial lens if I were directing Julius Caesar. Like, why doesn't Brutus think he's going to be a threat? I mean, that's a bad... Now, it's not like I'm in favor of Brutus' decision to kill Caesar or anything, but if you're thinking from that point of view, it's a really bad decision not to kill Mark Antony. It's a really bad decision. It ends up undermining
Worst
everything
decision.
they do. And why would you why would you think like, oh, it's no big deal? He says, as for Mark Antony, this is where he's talking to the group. They've all decided that they're not going to swear their oath. They don't need to swear it because they're doing something honorable and upright and smart. Here we go. We're going to do it. Here's the plan. And Brutus says to the group's like, and we should kill Mark Antony too, right? And Brutus says, as for Mark Antony, think not of him. For he can do no more than Caesar's arm when Caesar's head is off. Great writing, great metaphor. And clearly they don't take him very seriously. So directorially, I think like, well, why? Why don't they take him seriously as a rival political power figure?
That's why it's so exciting to me. And this is reminding me, I tried to keep that part really intact in that song is so long. The Conspirator song that's still called Conspirator Song. Everyone, the titles for this show that I'm writing,
Conspirator Song.
It's just Conspirator Song. It's like 6 minutes. But that stanza that I have, he sings the melody of his prayer, which is how I end Act 1, is when he finally decides to kill Caesar. Like that's, to me, that feels like a big turning point for him. And then the next act begins with the conspirators being like, hey, we're here. You want to go kill Caesar now? And he sings his melody from the previous song, since that's still the headspace that he's in. But that stanza, he goes, Antony is far from threatening, a sycophant, as you once said, because Cassius says that about him earlier. There's no danger in a limb of Caesar if we rid Caesar of his head, is how I say that. And then he says that they're not butchers, blah, blah, blah. Tries to make it sacrificial and nice, even though they're just killing somebody. It's interesting because all of the characters in Caesar, all of our main characters, make very large, unforgiving errors. that lead to their demise. I mean, tragedy. Brutus with the decision to not kill Mark Antony, and also not listen to Cassius when he warns him earlier. This is something that he doesn't recover from.
And the funeral,
But
the
Mark
decision
Antony,
to let Mark Antony
yes,
speak too is a really bad decision.
yeah, huge error all around. Yeah. Just like first rule of rap battle is like, why would you let him go second?
Don't
it's
give
just
him
the worst
a mic.
idea I've ever heard. Like literally, don't let him speak. Period. And the thing is, Mark Antony also does make a mistake earlier in the play when he's talking to Caesar early on, and Caesar's like, "Hey, buddy, can you come here?" And he's like, "What's wrong, pal?" And he's like, "Hey, what do you think of Cassius? Do you think he's like chill or no?" And then Mark Antony's like, "I don't see a problem with Cassius," yes. Which he doesn't get it either. But something I find interesting is Mark Antony ultimately is the only one who says that he's loyal to Caesar and follows through on it. He is the only one who is kind of rewarded for his character. Everyone else doesn't stay true in that way. Again, like Cassius is willing to go all the way into Bruce's personal life to get him to make this decision. It's manipulative, even though they consider each other true friends. Mm-hmm. Mark Antony also considers he's the only one who's actually loyal to Caesar, follows through, proves it with his speech. And so his mistake is forgiven. All of the other characters in the story do not get that same grace, which I find fascinating.
Yeah, that is fascinating. One thing that we have looked at when we looked at some other musicals during Adaptation Month is this connection between when you're adapting a novel, a musical has structures built in where characters can sing their inner monologues, which is not something that we really have in straight plays. We don't really have a language for that generally, other than Shakespeare, where we have the Shakespeare soliloquy. And so we looked at this connection between novels and Shakespeare and musicals, where they all have the ability to just like take off the top of a character's head and show you what they're thinking. In prose writing, the author can just write it. Here they can just write Grace thinks blah 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 blah. It's very easy in prose. In Shakespeare, he has this device that still flummoxes people to this day, where the characters just step out and look at the audience and say what they're thinking. And in musicals, it's actually very much built into the core structure of musicals, where they step up and sing what they're thinking. And so there's always been, to me, a real kinship between Shakespeare and musicals in this ability for a character to just say, here's what I think.
And it's been, believe me, quite helpful. I sort of have, I guess, like a spectrum, because this is all sung through. I'm not, I would not call myself a pro book writer, so that it's like one scene of actual dialogue that I have. And again, anytime that a word is spoken, like Cassius, for example, he has a lot of like, he speaks in rhythm a lot, like borderline rapping in The Conspirator, in Shall Rome, the villain trio, like he does do that. As this sort of way for me to say, like, here's how down to earth you are, versus how up in it. Like, again, ranges, Mark Antony's a soprano, he's up here, and if you're speaking, you're so far from that. Anyway, when I'm trying to figure out, okay, which of this is like a scene, which of this would be dialogue if it wasn't sung through, I approach those songs very differently to, say, Bruce's Prayer, which is, that sort of solo moment he has to himself is an opportunity for really, truly classical musical theater, like using the song to watch someone process something and come out of the song in a different place than where they began.
A character making a decision is like one of the core principles of, at least like since the golden age, musicals. Like, I'm going to step up. Absolutely. I don't know what I'm going to do, and I'm going to sing a song to figure it out.
And it's something that's so beneficial to the story when you're watching as an audience member, because it's something that is so unique to musical theater in that way. Like, for example, I talk a lot about, I'm just referencing a lot of Sondheim today, where he talks about how musical theater is linear, and the way that you have to write a song has to sort of be digested immediately. Your rhymes need to land correctly. How you phrase the thing. You can't just sit in the chair and rewind it. It's not like prose or reading a novel, like you're saying, where you can sit and look at a page for an hour until you feel like you've gotten what you got from it. in theater, you have one shot and it's energy and it's this momentum that you have to be able to receive. And it's why it's great that I have such wonderful text to base this off of. It's a built-in, already pre-calculated, and I can depend on it kind of moment that the audience is going to be able to receive and sort of empathize with all of these inner monologues of these characters. And see the truest sense of themselves, which is very important in a show like this when really, especially Brutus, isn't true to himself ever. Brutus's prayer at the end of Act 1 is kind of the only opportunity for you to see at all what he's actually thinking, which is why that was so fun. Same thing with Mark Antony has this moment as well when they leave him alone. Again, awesome monologue here. They leave him alone with Caesar, and he's like, oh my gosh, Caesar, I'm so sorry I said all that stuff. I'm literally going to set Rome on fire. And this is, again, it's kind of this blood. Like, literally, like mothers will be crying. Yeah. Like it is insane. Yeah. And it's kind of a mirror. I try really, really hard to maintain any mirror images. Like I said, like the beginning of the thing, how it opens is very similar to how it closes. And also Mark Antony's arc and Brutus's I've always thought were quite interesting since they're both sort of, you know, these proteges to Caesar, but in different camps. And Mark Antony has this very similar thing where all of a sudden he starts as this sad, you know, we still picture him as this kind, loyal person that we see in the beginning. And now how on earth do people in real life have these sorts of developments, and become someone who would then want to go set Rome on fire? It's really interesting to me to be able to like see the inner workings of people in that way. And I think not only will be fascinating to the audiences, but also something that like the more you know about a person, you can empathize with them, and consider that in your own life, I guess. Not wanting to set Rome on fire, but you know.
Well, we are winding down on our time in what's just been a tremendous conversation. Grace, for folks that have been inspired during this conversation and they want to be able to follow the project, where you want to remind us, where can we connect with the stuff that's about to be happening, the really exciting stuff?
Yeah, definitely stay tuned on my socials. That is the best place. My Instagram is just my name. It's at Grace Yurchuk. My TikTok is not for some reason. It's it's the Grace Place. And really any of those are going to have all my updates, but the best thing to look forward to, you can check out the Kickstarter that's still live if you want to see more about what I'm doing. And just stay tuned for the EP that's being recorded very soon.
That is so exciting. We will share to our pages the stuff that we see too, to keep our audience updated about it. We're so excited about the Caesar musical. I can't wait to hear the material that comes out of the studio. That's great. For our listeners, if you want to connect with us on social media, our handles are at No Script Podcast. We're in all the usual places. You can connect us there. You can also send us an email, noscriptpodcast@gmail.com. We usually try to follow up with those as best we can, and we will be happy to send on a message for Grace. If you have that, just go ahead and send that to us and we will pass that on. noscriptpodcast@gmail.com. You can also recommend us to your family, your friends, anybody you know that likes these kinds of conversations about great writing, about storytelling, about theater. Send them our way. They can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, all the places you get your podcasts. We also just post a link on our Facebook page. If you have like not very tech savvy folks, if they just got a Facebook, just go to our Facebook page every Monday when we publish, click and play right from there, including next Monday when we are back with another great conversation about another great script. Until then, I'm Jacob, and I've been delighted to be joined by Grace Yurchuk. Grace, thank you so much for being here.
Yay, thank you so much. This was so fun.
Great. We're so glad. Thanks so much. Thank you all. We'll see you next week.